$850,000, right? So that's a big miss, really. Although, as Ed Ludlow points out, investors may have updated their expectations, like at 859. Apple right now up 2.5%, even though Foxconn is pulling Chinese workers out of.
Nei, det var noe det.
Ja, nei, nå funker ikke kamera heller nå.
Tok sitt i dere.
Ja, det så teit. Det så irriterende. På det køddet her nå, så rammer det gull med $13, bare fordi ikke jeg fikk komme opp her. Jeg får ikke koblet på nå, så nå funker jo ikke kamera heller nå. Nå funker jo ikke det heller nå. Kan dere se meg nå?
The design software company it filed yesterday, I believe, to list.
Jeg ser chartene inn jo.
This month, for more, let's bring in Bloomberg tech reporter Brody Ford. Brody,
Men ekko.
Det ekko nå også?
Details here. What do we know so far?
Ja, det som ekko.
What Figma does is it's software to design applications on your phone, on the computer, and it's kind of hit pieces of software.
Jeg vet ikke, sånn som jeg bare irriterer meg.
Like a Zoom, and the question for them is, can they pivot, can they expand to be more than just a design software? Can it be used by people across the office and become a kind of a true platform? The growth looks good. The numbers are good, and investors are pretty excited about this, so I expect their reception to be pretty warm to this one.
What is, I mean, I see that they had revenue of $228 million in the quarter through March. So, let's say $1 billion in revenue. Are they worth 20 times sales?
Yeah, I think the thing to remember about this kind of software is how sticky it is, right? I mean, if I design applications all day and all my templates are in there and our whole team is using it, we're going to keep paying that, right? I mean, Figma recently raised their prices and, you know, people stuck with it. This is a kind of software that kind of maintains generally.
I have to say, it's interesting to see any IPO filing these days. It's also interesting to see one in July. Typically, it feels like companies maybe wait until after Labor Day to go back to the markets. Not in this case.
I think the trends are very good for them right now, and I think there is this question around AI disruption right now. I mean, Adobe is kind of the classic comparison to them in terms of kind of business, and investors are very worried right now that Adobe can be kind of replaced with these lightweight competitors that are all in on AI, and Figma certainly falls into that category. I mean, they announce in their filing that our margins are going to stay compressed because we're spending so much on implementing AI in our products to make sure we stay competitive.
Even if Adobe gets replaced, you won't be able to get them to stop billing you.
That's true.
It's been the bane of my existence. Tech reporter Brody Ford, thanks so much for joining on this Figma story. Coming on the next hour, Joanne Feeney on fears of higher tariff levels on specific countries like Japan. Then we're going to talk real estate with Thor's Joe Sitt, and Hotel 101 CEO talks about her goal of being a top hotel operator in 101 countries by 2040. This is Open Interest.
How are we going to get the debt down and the deficit down if we have these big tax cuts?
Well, David, let me just say, I think the deficit is probably the most important issue today
in terms of the long-term impact on the economy. And just to put this in perspective, in the first term, we had debt to GDP ratio of about 100%. And with the tax cuts and economic growth before COVID, we were growing the economy faster than we were growing the debt. So that ratio would have come down. And I think we were trying to get it down to 90 to 95. The big focus on the first term was military spending. We unfortunately had to increase non-military spending to get it through the House and Senate. But what really impacted us was COVID. And I think, as you know, firsthand, we had to spend a lot of money in COVID or we would have had a worldwide depression, not recession. I think the problem was, the first $2 trillion was well spent. The next $2 trillion we never should have spent. And then the Biden administration kept on spending. So, we have debt to GDP of close to 125% today. That's a gigantic problem. Secretary Bessent has talked about getting the deficit down from 6% to 3% of GDP, and that's got to be a major focus.
What is going to be the consequence for U.S. markets?
We are basically deep in the European earnings season.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
Bloomberg loves earnings.
I know it's like your Super Bowl, right?
I can't wait. It's like opening presents in the morning.
All right, it will be exciting.
Nobody covers earnings like Bloomberg.
CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.
I'm Deborah Rodriguez.
The House will be in order.
Lawmakers in the House of Representatives in place to debate and then vote on the Senate's updated version of President Trump's big budget bill. Republican leaders are scrambling to win over GOP holdouts, concerned about changes that could increase the deficit and make deeper cuts to Medicaid. Correspondent Robert Costa.
Some House members, like Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky, are taking public stands against the legislation and winning some support. But for the most part, Republicans I'm speaking to in the Senate and the House, they say at the end of the day, they need to stand by President Trump. He runs the party. The voters are with him, and they don't feel like they have a lot of leverage to get out there on a political limb.
An official tells CBS News members of the House Freedom Caucus and moderate Republicans are expected to visit the White House today to discuss the bill. Just in from Wisconsin, the state's Supreme Court liberal majority has struck down a 176-year-old abortion ban. Justices ruled it was superseded by newer regulations, including statutes that criminalize the procedure only after a fetus can survive outside the womb. The jury in Sean Combs' trial is back to deliberating after announcing a partial verdict. CBS's Jerika Duncan is at the courthouse in New York.
Yesterday afternoon, they told the judge they had come to a decision on sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution charges. But the jury said it could not decide on the racketeering conspiracy charge because jurors had, quote, unpersuadable opinions.
Judge told them to keep trying on that last charge, which carries the possibility of life in prison. Australia has canceled Kanye West's visa.
The last straw for Australia was West's new song, Heil Hitler.
Heil Hitler!
You're going to have a song and promote that sort of Nazism? We don't need that in Australia.
Australia's Home Affairs Minister, Tony Burke.
We have enough problems in this country already without deliberately importing bigotry.
West had been a long-time visitor to Australia. He has family there and married Australian architect Bianca Sensori in 2022. Michael Wallace, CBS News.
Just days before the 4th of July, huge explosions rocked a fireworks warehouse in Northern California's Yolo County, putting locals on edge.
All of a sudden, the whole house just started shaking, and then
You know, it shook again. We thought it was an earthquake.
Yeah, I was like really scared when it first happened.
Sparked flames that spread across 80 acres. Tesla sales fell 13% in the last 3 months. This is CBS News. A restaurant chain is finally syncing up with grocery store prices.
Waffle House is dropping a 50-cent per egg surcharge that it imposed 5 months ago when prices were soaring and there was a bird flu outbreak. The surcharge sent a strong signal over the winter. Some others followed suit. The Agriculture Department says egg prices have come down. They fell nearly 13%. A dozen eggs now cost less than $3. In a social media post, Waffle House called it egg-cellent news and said, thanks for understanding. Steve Kathan, CBS News.
The Princess of Wales returned to public duties today to discuss a subject many can relate to, her cancer journey. Speaking at a hospital in Essex, England, Kate Middleton explained to patients, staff, and visitors, you put on a sort of brave, stoic face through treatment, and when it's done, I can crack on and get back to normal. She says that's the hardest part. Deborah Rodriguez, CBS News.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield. The market's telling me, here's another AI play. Just bid it, buy it. One person's chaos is another person's animal spirits.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business. These are two big-time blue-chip companies. Are people just too exuberant out there?
Bloomberg Intelligence with Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
All right, good Wednesday morning from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City to our worldwide audience. We are streaming live on YouTube as well, so check us out there. Coming up, we're going to check in with Pierre Ferragu, head of global technology infrastructure at New Street Research, get his thoughts on these Tesla sales numbers. A little bit weaker than expected, but as Dan Ives told us earlier today, better than the whispered numbers, so we'll get the breakdown there. Sylvia Jablonski, CEO and CIO of Defiance ETFs, to discuss her outlook for the market. Stuart Paul, U.S. economist with Bloomberg Economics. He'll give us a preview of the jobs number. The ADP number came in weak today, but not a lot of people pay attention to the ADP number. I'll just say it right there. So we're going to wait on the jobs number tomorrow. So we've got Norma Linda sitting in today with me today for the next couple hours, but we're going to kick this whole thing off right now with John Tucker, any Bloomberg Business Flash. John.
All right, and this Bloomberg Business Flash being brought to you by IBKR. Financial advisors switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost. Global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges, no conflicts of your interest. Learn more at ibkr.com/RIA. Well, Paul doesn't pay attention to it, but ahead of the government job report tomorrow, ADP says employment at U.S. companies fell in June for the first time in more than 2 years. Also, speaking of jobs, Microsoft cutting 9,000 workers, the second wave of major layoffs for the company. Tesla's global sales tumbling for the second quarter in a row, down 13% from the year-ago period. But that actually did manage to exceed what was the most pessimistic forecast. So Tesla, one of the most actively traded as usual, up right now 2.2%. Centene shares worst performing stock in the S&P 500, down over 33%. The health insurance company pulling its 2025 guidance. Never a good sign. And after setting records earlier this week, Amanda Gotti at PNC Bank says the recent stock surge is, in her opinion, justified.
we're starting to get to a little bit more clarity here and a little bit more focus on the hard data, which continues to come in solid, or at least better than expected. And so I think that's been the driver of this really material bounce that we've had these last couple months.
Right now, the S&P 500, 3 points higher, 62.01 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 114 points. The NASDAQ 150 points higher. That is up 0.2%. Now let's go overseas. Sterling right now down 1.2%. UK markets falling sharply, and also you go to their yields right now. The gilts, the 10-year bond, that is 15 basis points higher, shooting up to 4.6%. They're increasingly nervous over the fiscal situation in the UK, and also speculation of possible exit by Rachel Reeves, who's the chancellor of the Exchequer there. And just a couple, since we are a New York City-based radio station, just a couple of things to tell you about. You guys are covering this all morning with the Midtown Port Authority bus terminal, which was shut down. That has been reopened, but of course you have any number of delays up to an hour because of an earlier accident involving buses. And then we go to downtown Manhattan, where we are being told that there is a verdict in the Sean Diddy Holmes trial.
Okay. All right.
So there you
stay
go.
on top of that.
We check the markets and other stuff right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Hi, Nora.
Hello, John.
Nice
How
to
are
see
you?
Nora and Paul.
Yeah, Norma Linda, Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. As John said, we got kind of a mixed day in the market here. But let's take a look at some of the stocks on the move today. I'm Paul Sweeney alongside Norma Linda, and we're joined by managing editor for Bloomberg Markets Live blog, Christine Aquino. Christine, what are you looking at?
Well, Paul, John Tucker's covered it all, but let's dig in, shall we? Let's start with Centene, which
But you go into depth and
exactly,
do the smart
exactly,
stuff.
John. But yeah, Centene, ticker CNC, biggest underperformer on the S&P 500 at the moment. Declines accelerating now. That's down more than 36%, and that is primarily because it pulled its 2025 guidance, due really to the rising risk from the Affordable Care Act plans. That company is the top seller of ACA health plans, and legislation around what's going to happen with Medicaid very much up in the air at the moment. Really a sense that it got caught unaware of what's going on there, and so we have UBS analysts cutting its view to neutral from buy on the company again because of this adjustment. And Bloomberg Intelligence also commenting on the potential decline in its credit rating because the surprise guidance withdrawal. They're saying that raises the risk of an S&P downgrade to junk and a potential exclusion of their bonds from the Bloomberg U.S. Aggregate Index. Yeah, shares are really extending their losses. I see it's down for its worst day ever. And when you look at the broader performance, it's really not been doing too well overall because we see shares down about 42% so far this year. So lots of news to parse through, but what else are you keeping your eyes on? Well, looking at Tesla, again, ticker TSLA, John Tucker gave you the headlines, but let's dig into some of the potential kind of details there. Again, like Tesla rising 1.1% at the moment, and that is despite the tumble in their global sales. It really is benefiting from lowered expectations. This is what we're seeing at the moment. We have analysts reacting to the news that, yes, sales tumbled, but the fact that deliveries were in line is seen as being a win, and it's also a sign that demand growth is slowing rather than spiraling. That's according to William Blair analysts. And yeah, so it's basically just benefiting from the fact that the expectation for the decline was much, much worse than what we actually got in reality. And so it's a bit of a relief rally for Tesla here.
Well, we heard from Matt Winkler, editor emeritus of Bloomberg News, the founder of Bloomberg News. He's now a Bloomberg opinion columnist. He put out a column today. I'm not going to say defending Tesla's stock, but just putting in context of what the company's accomplished over the years in terms of stock price performance, valuation, revenue, and earnings growth, saying this thing is still a behemoth out there by a lot of objective measures. So interesting to put that into context. So check that out on the Bloomberg terminal or on Bloomberg.com/opinion. All right, what else you got for us? One more.
Looking at Microsoft, ticker MSFT. So shares not down too much, just down 0.2%. And that's after the news that they are, of course, laying off 9,000 workers. This is the second wave of major layoffs this year. Seems like a lot of that very much focused in their Xbox division. And so that division apparently began informing their employees of the job cuts on Wednesday morning. This is the fourth mass layoff at that Xbox division in the last 18 months. But, we're seeing a bit of a muted price reaction to this, just slightly lower in the share move here, primarily because, it's been well flagged. A lot of investors expecting this.
I'm not a gamer. I think we discussed this earlier in the week, but people are still on the Xbox, apparently. Apparently so.
I'll leave that to John Tucker. He's, I'm still playing Pong. Let's be honest.
I do have an Xbox, but I don't really use it.
John Tucker could be a
Surprises
secret gamer.
in the morning.
No, not even a chance. Not a chance.
All right, Christine, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Christine Aquino giving us the latest on the stock movers. And that's a podcast. You can check that out anywhere you get your podcast to see the big movers, winners and losers in the stock market. Check out Stock Movers, the podcast. All right, we've been talking a lot about Tesla this morning. Their delivery numbers came in weaker than expected. We had Dan Ives from Wedbush Securities on earlier, and he was just saying, hey, relative to maybe the Whisper number, they came in a little bit better than expected here. But let's get the broad overview of what's happening at our good friends at Tesla. The stock's up about 2.8% today, but it's down about 24% year-to-date. We turn to Pierre Ferragu, head of global technology infrastructure at New Street Research. Pierre, thanks so much for joining us here. How do you think about these Tesla numbers? What does it mean for the near and intermediate term story at Tesla?
Yes, as you say, there is a bit of a positive surprise, like people tracking very precisely deliveries in various markets were expecting slightly lower numbers. The surprise comes from the US. The US is a place where it's the most difficult to track the number of Tesla being delivered, and the US beat expectations. So that's a Model Y coming in, doing actually quite well. That's good. But then at the end of the day, you have to remember the big picture. We are down 13% year on year. So we are facing a situation where Tesla is struggling to sell cars. Gross margin is in the low teens. To me, Tesla facing good demand should be able to defend like mid-20s gross margin. So we are facing like a core business, an auto business that is really at a very low point that is struggling. And so what's the difficulty? You have like one structural difficulty that we understand relatively well. It's that with their current product, Tesla has kind of saturated its opportunity. Tesla needs lower price points to keep growing. And that's in the plan. They're working on it. And then you have a number of other issues. Electric cars are less fashionable than they were a couple of years ago. The Tesla brand has suffered, particularly in Europe, where numbers are down like almost 40% year on year. And so it is definitely, it's difficult to quantify, but it is a significant headwind as well. And overall, the economy is not the best you can imagine for auto demand.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the Mag 7 stocks, we see Tesla as the primary laggard this year, down about 23%. And of course, we know that investors have really been vying for Musk's attention as he's been really politically involved. So as we're seeing these numbers come through, what do things look like moving forward? Are these numbers a massive impact, or are the Tesla loyalists still out there? And is there some further positivity to come?
So, yes, the Tesla stock has been on a roller coaster. It's like a very low performer this year, but it was like a clear outperformer last year. And as you said, it's following the political career, if I may say, of the CEO Elon Musk, and this has created this situation. Now, if you look at the stock, since April 1st. What you see is that what tends to really move the stock is actually the news flow around how the company is now focused on deploying fleets of robotaxis. They've just started that in a couple of weeks ago, like late last month. And I think that's going to be the primary driver of the stock going forward.
Right.
Hello. Uncertainty on how fast Tesla is going to be able to deploy a robotaxi or even make profits, like generate the profits out of a robotaxi fleet. but the size of the price is so gigantic and so much more than the auto business that this is probably what drives the stock going forward.
Pierre, thank you so much for joining us. Always appreciate getting your thoughts there. Pierre Ferragu, he's head of global technology infrastructure at New Street Research.
Slumdog, 5 lott. Da har du dødsønske, tror jeg.
Trafficking trial. Our own June Grosso will join us later to break that down. So we'll have that coming up for you. S&P 500, that's up 5 points. The Dow's down 125 points. The Nasdaq
Det var faen meg godt.
100 points. So how's that for direction? The VIX just below 17. This is
Vi hadde gull nettopp oppe på nesten vi var oppe på 52 for åpning her. Nei, 51 da, litt over 51. Og Tesla opp 3,3%. Den var ned nesten 7 i går på grunn av Trump og de truslene der. Ellers har det ikke skjedd så mye. Fortsatt positivitet på gull. Iran går ut av den nuclear-avtalen. Det er positivt på gull. Oi, hva var det for noe? Tesla med nytt salgsfall. Og øker med 3,5%. Det gir jo masse mening. Ja, gull skal gå videre opp. Tesla leverer ræva tall. Nedgang på 13,5%, så går den opp 3%. Fy faen. Jeg kan garantere at den korreksjonen som kommer nå kommer til å bli så stygg. Yes. Yes, I'll come. Okay, bye. Bare flytte bilene.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. I just want to bring you the breaking headlines. It's not financial news, but the Sean Combs trial in Lower Manhattan. He was found guilty on 2 counts, including prostitution, but the big charges against him, he was found not guilty. That would be racketeering and conspiracy. And of course, June Grosso, our legal analyst, will stop by to break this all down. Centene right now, the worst performing stock in the S&P 500 after the company withdrew its guidance. Not a good sign for the healthcare industry. And ahead of tomorrow's all work non-farm payrolls, we have the major stock averages. They are mixed right now. The S&P 500 up just 5 points at 6204 in the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average 104 points lower. That is now 0.2%. And the tech-heavy NASDAQ 174 points higher right now. The 2-year yield, which is more policy reactive, that is right now unchanged, 376. We are following the markets in the UK falling sharply. You had sterling down over 1%, and the gilt, the yields there, the 10-year bond is up 16 basis points. That is at 461. This has all been triggered by the financial problems that they're having, and also the Prime Minister, his failure to confirm Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, her post at the next general election. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Nora and Paul.
John Tucker, thank you so much for that. Norma, Linda, and Paul Sweeney, we're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in Midtown Manhattan. We're also streaming live on YouTube. So head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Live Podcast, Bloomberg Live Radio. That's where you'll find us there. We're also, if you're on Smart TV, we're on your Roku and all that kind of stuff. You just search Bloomberg Pursuits, and that's where you'll find us there. One of the, I think, great stories on Global Wall Street over the last 15 years for me has been the growth in ETFs. The funds continue to flow into ETFs, and it's been a great tool for the average investor, primarily in terms of lowering costs and giving lots of different investment options for investors. Sylvia Jablonski, she's the Chief Executive Officer and Chief Investment Officer at Defiance ETFs. She joins us from New York City. Sylvia, what are you seeing on your platform here in the first half of 2025? We had that 20% sell-off in the S&P 500, retraced it all right back up. We're up 5% year to date. How did the funds flow on your platform during that kind of volatility?
Yeah, good morning. It was actually super interesting to see. And I think it's in line with, a lot of the things that we've talked about in the past, right? That when you get these big dips, you have to kind of look into the future and think about what it'll look like, 3 months out, 6 months out, and things like that. And that's exactly what happened, right? So when we saw the April pullback of 20% or so, actually a lot of our funds, because we were, really geared towards AI and quantum computing, machine learning, things like this, the higher beta plays, they were down that much, if not even more. And interestingly, what we actually saw was that flows came in. So during that period, we kept getting creates and creates and creates in the funds. And so that told us that, either retail or institutional money or both were, thinking that this was a dip that we were going to come back from. And we kind of know the story, right? There was this high stakes poker game with tariffs that seemed like the worst case scenario was going to happen, and that didn't happen. And, then we had geopolitics coming into the mix more recently. It just seems like the market is now aware of these things, kind of living with them until we get more news, but stocks are back to rallying.
So I know some of the names that you're looking at and that you all favor are some of those quantum computing stocks, as you mentioned, IBM, NVIDIA, and the likes of those. But as we're looking at a lot of the market rallying behind these tech names, what are you all seeing in terms of ETF flows and the outlook for tech?
Yeah, so similar type of thing. So I would say most of our flows are coming into things like MicroStrategy, which is, as we know, cryptocurrency related. We're seeing a lot of good flows into some of our AI names and, the funds that relate to that. Our biggest flow story for the year is really quantum computing, the quantum ETF. So, QTUM is well over $1 billion now. And that's just been off of this idea that both quantum computing and AI are going to, power the future and things like this. And so that's really what we're seeing. Risk appetite is back on. I'd say around April, the pullback, one of the bigger flows that we saw was XMAG. So people were looking to diversify out of Mag 7, right? But here we are again, Mag 7 rallying, and the puck goes back to quantum and AI, and that's really been the story.
Sylvia, what's your view then for the second half of the year? If the first half was characterized by this crazy volatility of a down 20% and then a rally right back, what's your outlook for the second half of the year?
I say this a little bit cautiously because I feel like we have a high bar right now, right? It doesn't feel like a recession is coming. GDP might end up being, in that 2% range, a little bit higher. Earnings are expected to be 5% or more my take is that AI and some of that tech is going to make that number look a little bit better, and then you can get a rally for that. Tariffs, not as bad as we thought. Geopolitics, is the 12-day war over? If all of this plus Fed cuts plus the big beautiful bill come to fruition, then it's all systems go for the rest of the year. But we've seen this game before, right? Like something, we wake up on Monday morning and there's another geopolitical issue. So I'd say that volatility will continue, but overall, macro wise, from a macro view, I think that the market is poised to rally and there's momentum in equities right now.
All right, Sylvia, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Sylvia Jablonski, Chief Executive Officer and Chief Investment Officer of Defiance ETFs. So again, I guess some New York City news, some national news. The jury reached a verdict on all counts of the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking trial. June Grasso joins us, legal analyst for Bloomberg. June, a couple of acquittals, couple of guilty pleas, or guilty findings. What do we know?
So we know that the jury really looked at all the charges individually and really paid attention to this. I mean, besides an acquittal on all charges, this is probably the best that Sean Combs could expect, because he was found not guilty of the most serious charges, which would have landed him in prison for life. So what he was found guilty of, and it's kind of amazing because the women were on the stand for days and days, and there were tears, and everyone said it was very emotional. But he was found not guilty of sex trafficking in regards to his former girlfriend Cassie Ventura and another woman who was named Jane. So he now faces. So what he was found guilty of was transportation to engage in prostitution. And so that means that the jury saw that he flew women around the country in order to get them to engage in prostitution. What's another odd thing is yesterday afternoon, the jurors said, we are deadlocked on count one, the racketeering conspiracy, which is the most difficult count.
Right.
And we have people there who won't budge. And they came in this morning, and an hour later, they have a verdict of not guilty on that top charge, which says a couple of things to me. Tomorrow, the courts are closed. The jury wants to get home. So probably we'll find out, but probably the holdouts on that top charge said, forget it. We're caving. I mean, we'll find out what happens. But I mean, the fact that they came out with a not guilty on that top charge after saying they were deadlocked on it and they couldn't reach a verdict in an hour is sort of amazing. And it'll be interesting to see what the jury, I mean, I assume that Combs is not happy that he was found guilty on this, but the maximum he could get is 10 years in prison, and it was far worse. And also you can see the the defense having some appellate issues about mixed verdicts are also often looked upon weirdly by appellate courts. So I think that, or they tried to make them do that. So I think that it's sort of an amazing
So is he going to
verdict.
do any time here? I guess is the
Yeah, I
question.
think he is going to do time.
Okay.
Interesting.
But there's going to be definitely an appeal. Now, he's in prison. He has not been given bond. So he's been in prison for about a year in Brooklyn federal detention lockup, which is not the most pleasant of places, even among prisons. So I don't think the judge is going to let him out on bail pending sentencing, pending the appeal, which they often do. So we'll see what happens, but I expect that he will be sentenced to prison time, but it won't be more than 10 years, which he was facing life in prison with the other counts. So the jury acquitted him of all those counts that he would have spent his life in prison.
Wow. And June, when we look at this case, I mean, we saw the defense and we saw a lot of people really focusing on what was allegedly some of the domestic violence videos and whatnot that we saw between him and Cassie Ventura. And so a lot of people were looking at this case thinking about it from a domestic violence standpoint. And I know that the defense was echoing that we're looking at something different here. When we see how all this played out, were these charges and ultimately what the jury decided in terms of the verdict, was it expected?
Were the charges expected?
Was the verdict expected?
No, I don't think the verdict was expected. I think that the racketeering conspiracy the top charge was very difficult for the prosecution to make out here, because not only do they have to find the jury underlying acts, but they also had to find that there was an enterprise. And during closing arguments, I believe the defense put up a picture of Combs and his whole entire entourage and his family and said, does this look like an enterprise? price. So that was a difficult count, but I assume, the prosecution, certainly I think they expected guilty verdicts on the racketeering, on the sex trafficking charges. So, no, this wasn't expected in any sense.
What's the appeals process like? How long could that take?
Oh, that could take years, I think. And I have to check with the New York courts if they're slower than other courts.
Is
But
it
I mean,
unusual that he didn't get bail?
yeah, I found it very unusual that he didn't get bail because he could have put up a bail package that included, electronic monitoring and all kinds of things. But you think back to Sam Bankman-Fried, his bail package was unbelievable, and the judge refused it. So they're afraid that when they have that much wealth, that there's some way that they're going to find a way to get out of the country when they're facing life in prison. So that's why. But it also, when they do that, when they lock them up, it hampers their ability to prepare their defense with their lawyers, because lawyers have to then make appointments to see them. They can only see them in certain circumstances. So it really does hurt the defense's preparation to have to, go out to Brooklyn and make appointments to see them. So I don't think he's going to be getting bail at all, but we'll see.
So what happens next? What are you looking toward in terms of moving forward?
Well, there'll be a sentencing. I don't know if the judge has set a date for the sentencing, and then there'll be appeals.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, thanks, June. Appreciate that. Getting the breakdown there on the Sean Diddy Combs verdicts being read out. Let's get back to the markets where we belong. S&P 500 up 12 points. The Dow down 55 points. Then NASDAQ up 131 points. And Nora, we had Dan Ives on from Wedbush Securities on earlier, dressed egregiously bad, I might add, with his various sport coats and pants and things.
He always has something fun.
He always does. He says it's all about the robo-taxi and AI. So that's, I guess, what the bulls are hanging their hat on, because the auto business is a tough business.
Most definitely, and especially as we just think about AI more broadly. I mean, that's what many of my sources have been telling me, that it's just AI charging for. We have so much demand when we think about that. So it's interesting when you think about the intersection between that and autos.
Yep. So we'll see. But and Elon Musk has left Doge, left the U.S. government, focusing full-time on his various companies, of which there are many. And I think Tesla investors are hoping that that Tesla will get the attention it needs.
I'm sure.
And he said he's also going to be focusing back on the sales for Europe, sales in North America, and other
Very
parts
important.
of the world that have been challenged. So we'll stay on top of that. Again, S&P 500 up 13 points. We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash being brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses, Oracle offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. This is for new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitments. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. Ahead of the jobs report tomorrow, the major stock averages mixed right now. You have 5 of the 11 major industry groups in the S&P 500. They are up. Information technology, that's in the lead right now. That's home to Apple. Those shares up 4.5%. And shares of Nike up just around 4%. They make a lot of their stuff in Vietnam, and President Trump is now posting on Truth Social that he reached a deal, trade deal with Vietnam. We don't have any details on that just yet. Not a good sign for the healthcare industry. Centene, the worst performing stock in the S&P 500. The company withdrew its 2025 guidance. Centene shares, they are down close to 40%. Still, Sarah Hunt, chief market strategist at Alpine Saxon Wood, says, you know what? The bad news scenarios are not actually panning out.
The reason the market is where it is, I think, besides good earnings, is that people are sort of having the realization, well, what if those bad things don't happen? Because if they don't, we've got some relatively decent runway.
Right now, the S&P 500, 15 points higher. That's up 0.25%, 62.13 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, 28 points lower. NASDAQ 100 is up 124 points. And markets in London falling sharply. The pound shedding 1.2% against the dollar. The 10-year gilt up close to 16 basis points. Investors getting nervous about Britain's finances. They're also speculating about Chancellor Rachel Reeves' possible exit from the government. Comedy Central delaying the upcoming debut of the new season of South Park. The show's creators blaming the delay on complications from the pending merger of Comedy Central's parent, Paramount Global, and Skydance Media. Trey Parker and Matt Stone write, this merger is an S blank 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 show, and it's blanking up South Park. You can fill in the blanks, Nora. We check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Nora and Paul.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Nora, Melinda, and Paul Sweeney, we're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in Midtown Manhattan. We're also streaming live on YouTube as well, so head over to that internet thing, search Bloomberg Live Podcast, and that's where you'll find us. All right, the big, beautiful bill, it is out of the Senate now. I guess it's back to the House. Hopefully, they're trying to get something on the president's desk prior to July 4th, which is Friday. Let's dig into the details here. Andrew Silverman, he's a government analyst for tax policy. Boy, that sounds fun. For Bloomberg Intelligence, he joins us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. You're the man of the hour now, Andrew, because people want to talk taxes. And what's in this bill that jumps out at you?
Well, can I just tell you, this is the most exciting time, not only for this year, but probably the last 5-6 years.
Well,
wow, this is your
like
time.
My birthday, the Olympics, the Super Bowl, all rolled into one. It's very, very exciting. So what's in this bill? Well, about between 78 to 85% of the bill is just the extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or making it permanent. The rest of it is, I mean, I guess you could say window dressing, right? I mean, they're meeting some of the things that Trump campaigned on: no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, the no tax on Social Security, things like that. Those are in there. They're making permanent the partnership tax deduction. So a lot of stuff in here for businesses, and extending the individual tax cuts as well.
But this would be huge for Trump, though, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Massive.
Right. He needs to have a big win. And this would be a massive win for him.
Okay, good.
I'm looking at, so this could potentially offer some big breaks for Alphabet, Disney, Apple. What exactly would happen there?
Right. I think that it would be a big benefit for practically every U.S. company, except for maybe clean energy companies. But I think for multinationals, what they get is an extension. Well, they're making the 954C6 tax permanent, which is really a big deal for all those tax wonks out there. It basically allows companies to transfer cash between their foreign entities offshore, and it's something that companies have been wanting to make permanent for 20 years, and that's in this bill. It also strikes a provision that was forcing large multinationals like Apple to pay for very expensive compliance for their foreign corporations, their controlled foreign corporations, and that would be eliminated here. So it would save them a ton of money on compliance.
How is this going to be paid for?
That is an excellent question. and it's a real problem because, this bill is about $750 billion short of what the House wanted, and it violates their reconciliation instructions. And so now we're sort of left wondering what's going to happen with this bill in the House. Are they going to just ignore the fact that it's $750 billion short of their $2 trillion requirement, or are they going to make a fuss and perhaps amend the bill and send it back to the Senate, or are they going to go to a conference committee and have to work out some sort of solution there? Or are they going to accept it and pass this thing, and by July 4th, it'll go to the president's desk? We don't know.
Andrew, what are some of the most contentious parts of the bill? What are they really, really hammering in on in terms of some of the tax implications here?
I mean, I think the most controversial part of the bill is probably the clean energy provisions. I mean, they're cutting back on, wind and solar are the big ones, right? But in the wraparound amendment that they got yesterday night, they actually made it a little bit easier for wind and solar companies. They took off an excise tax that they were going to have applied to them, and they allowed this. They allowed wind and solar companies to qualify for the credits when they begin their construction, as opposed to when they finish their projects, which is a really big deal for them because these things take so long to develop.
Interesting.
So talk to us about those temporary tax parts that were made permanent. Is that typically how things happen? I mean, is that because it just seems like the initial Trump tax breaks from his first term. Now, this bill right now is just making those permanent, correct?
Right. So the corporate tax rate, it remains at 21%, and that was made permanent in 2018. But the partnership tax cut that was about to go away in 2026, that's a 20% deduction. The House actually wanted a 23% reduction for partnerships. And yeah, I mean, in order for this to qualify for reconciliation, it should be technically budget neutral. So that's why they had all these phase outs. And so things like the expensing of research and development that they've made permanent, the Senate would make permanent in this bill, or the expansion of the interest expense deduction, capital expensing. All of these things were temporary in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And in this bill, they're made permanent. That's right.
So does this affect taxpayers at all? And if so, to what degree?
Yeah, the average taxpayer. What
does it mean for us?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You get to so that's a good question actually. You get to keep your tax cuts from 2018. If this thing had expired, it would be a pretty large tax hike for individuals. Now, unfortunately, for people in very expensive state tax states,
what is the SALT? Where are we on SALT?
Well, so what the Senate wants to do is allow a $40,000 state and local tax deduction for people making $500,000 or less. These are married couples, $20,000 a person, but it goes away after 2029. The House wanted to make that permanent.
All right, very good. Andrew Silverman, government analyst covering the tax policy for Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio here. So we appreciate that. We're getting that. And we'll probably, I don't know, John Tucker, are we going to get a ruling? Are we going to get something from the House today, or is that pushed into tomorrow maybe, do you think?
I would be surprised if it happens today, right?
Yeah. Right. I mean, the rules...
It'll be after the 4th of July, because they were called back, and vacation week. It'll be next week.
Okay. And weather. A lot of people couldn't make it to the Hill.
Fair. It was hot.
And
I'll be here tomorrow. I'll be here tomorrow, so no need to worry. If there's something, we will have it for you. S&P 500 up 13 points. The Dow down 49. The NASDAQ up 150 points. We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
listening to Bloomberg Intelligence with Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Norma Linda, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. One of the big movers today is a healthcare insurer, Centene, plunges in what Bloomberg News is saying is a foreboding sign for health insurers. It has to do with the Affordable Care Act and some cracking down on who's on those plans, and stock's down big here. So we had to go to an expert, Glenn Losov, senior healthcare analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Glenn, what is Centene and what's the news today? Let's start there.
Okay, Centene is a health insurer focusing mainly on Medicaid and health insurance marketplace markets. The reason the stock is down
40%
today is because yesterday after the market closed, the company withdrew 2025 guidance, highlighting higher acuity and slower membership growth in its marketplace, and secondarily also highlighting increase in medical costs in some of the markets in its Medicaid geographies.
So I know insurers have been really growing worried here, investors as well, about the changes that could happen to the Affordable Care Act. What does this all foreshadow about the broader industry?
Well, most of the focus recently has been obviously on the overhang from the reconciliation bill, with the House passing its version and Senate passing yesterday its own version. There was some sort of improved visibility going into next year and the year after because of that. But at the same time, Centene's coming out with the guidance pool yesterday sort of put it right in front of us. So first, they're going to have to show stability. Either Centene or other health insurance companies will have to show some sort of stabilizing trends. As a reminder, Centene's guidance withdrawal comes approximately 2 months after United withdrew its guidance, which created a very negative sentiment for the whole group. And now it's the second punch within the same larger health insurers industry. So first thing is stability, and second thing, obviously, there's going to be a long-term overhang from whatever reconciliation bill brings to Medicaid cuts overall and just in general uncertainty until provisions are implemented.
All right, so here's Bloomberg News reporting. Centene is the top seller of ACA health plans. The government has been cracking down on inappropriate and fraudulent enrollments in those plans, meaning people who shouldn't have been on them are getting kicked off. Analysts have said that probably means customers who are paying into them but not filing many claims are now exiting. How did the company not know this? They're an insurance company. Their job is to price risk. How did they get so blindsided by this?
It's very difficult to sort of where we are to really fault a company. We're not in the trenches. Obviously, it's their business. They should be able to sort of foresee what's coming up in the next year and how to manage risk. But at the same time, there are so many things from Washington on policy changes, on how sick the patients are, and they manage thousands, if not millions, of people. So some of the things may be overlooked or may not just be presented sort of to be really included in their trend and risk calculations.
So you mentioned United Health, of course, Centene today. So these aren't necessarily isolated, at least that's how the street is viewing it. This is potentially an impact that people could see ricocheting throughout the entire sector?
Yes. So in general, these companies, as I said, Centene is focusing on marketplace and Medicaid. United is just an 800-pound gorilla focusing or has a huge market in all of the health insurance businesses. But that being said, in general, health insurers are trading as it's a commoditized industry. So they all, generally trade in the same direction. So if United, for example, I'm not saying they will do, but if United, for example, reinstates its guidance during the second quarter earnings release, it will create a stabilization effect for the whole industry. After that, if someone like United or Elvins, the larger players, show some stability or actually improvement in the operating environment, and the results that they report, it will impact the whole industry on the positive. So generally, it's something wrong with the one company, especially if someone as big as United, it impacts everyone else.
So, all right. So this is a function of the Trump administration cracking down on some of these Affordable Care Act plans. Is that kind of the origination of this?
I don't think so.
No. Okay.
But that Washington overhang, and usually it's a negative overhang. Either Republicans are leading in Washington or Democrats. It's always for health insurance. It's generally a negative wind from Washington. So that is still, Washington cracking on sort of health insurance in general is always in the background.
All right, Glenn, thanks so much for joining us, breaking this down for us. Glenn Losov, Senior Healthcare Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. All right, for our listeners in the U.S., a reminder, you can listen to us via satellite radio on Sirius XM Channel 121. Access the world's only global audio network, business network, coast to coast, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg Radio on Sirius XM Channel 121 is presented by Oracle. Stay tuned for the latest market news and industry research. The next hour of Bloomberg Intelligence starts right now as we look at this market. S&P up 11 points. The Dow negative 53 points, but the NASDAQ up 141 points. That's 0.7%. The Bloomberg Dollar Index higher today. A rare day of strength here over the last several months for the greenback. A little more coming up. This
is Bloomberg Intelligence with Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield. The market's telling me, here's another AI play. Just bid it, buy it. One person's chaos is another person's animal spirits.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business. These are two big-time blue-chip companies. Are people just too exuberant out there?
Bloomberg Intelligence with Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to check in with Matt Winkler. He's the chief editor-in-chief emeritus of Bloomberg News. He's the founder of Bloomberg News. He's got a fascinating column today out on Tesla. He says, hey, I know a lot of people are down on Tesla, but just look at the numbers in terms of valuation, revenue growth, cash flow growth, multiple. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to like at Tesla, so he'll come in and share his thoughts there. Rob Barnett, senior energy and commodities analyst on the Senate bill and what it means for solar demand and just green energy in general. I don't think that's going to be very good discussion. Jeffrey Palma, senior vice president and head of multi-asset solutions at Cohen & Steers. He's going to join us on markets. And Jamie Norris, Bloomberg News UK business editor on Wimbledon Investors, turns 75% profit trading access to VIP suites. That sounds interesting to me. So we got a lot coming up in the next hour. Right now, let's kick it all off with John Tucker and a Bloomberg business flash.
All right, guys, the major stock averages mixed as investors wait for the jobs report tomorrow. President Trump saying he reached a trade deal with Vietnam. Among the stocks impacted, Nike, they make a lot of their stuff there. It was up 1.7%. Microsoft cutting about 9,000 jobs, the second major wave of layoffs for the company this year. Economist David Rosenberg, meantime, at Rosenberg Research, says he's got a pretty dim outlook for U.S. growth.
I think that what's happening here that isn't priced into any asset class right now, none, is that the recession that most of us missed in 2022 and 2023 is actually already here. I see the evidence that it's already coming.
S&P 500 right now up 14 points, 62.12 on the index. The Dow 32 points lower than NASDAQ 100 right now, up 137 points. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Nora and Paul.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Mixed on the screen. Let's get a sense of what some individual stocks are doing right now. We'll do that with Christine Aquino. She is from Bloomberg News. She covers all the markets for us. She knows what's going on. Christine, what do you have for us?
Well, let's take a closer look at those Nike shares, Paul, because, yeah, as John Tucker said, a lot of volatility there. And so Nike, ticker NKE, currently up 1.4%, but we did get a lot of whipsaw there once we got some more details of President Trump's trade deal with Vietnam. And so the deal on the table is as such, right? He's going to be charging, or the U.S. is going to be charging 20% for Vietnam, or Vietnam's going to be paying 20% to the U.S. for any imports, and then also 40% tariff on transshipping. So that's when, goods come from one location, transferred to an intermediate destination before it reaches its final destination. So, yeah, Nike shares not liking some of those details.
Let's be clear on the language. And this is per Michael McKee, Bloomberg economics reporter. It's important to note that Vietnam is not going to pay us anything. American companies and consumers will pay the tax. That's how tariffs work.
There you go. So, yeah, the investors, again, trying to parse all those details and still trying to figure out what that all means. And so a lot of volatility in those shares today.
And it's interesting. I'm still stuck on yesterday's news about the snowfers. Do we remember this, or has too much happened in the past 24 hours? This hybrid sneaker loafers. Are any of you guys?
$500.
500? I missed that part.
Yes.
Would you be a buyer of those, Paul?
No. No, but Matt Winkler might. What else you got for us?
Looking at Amcor today as well, ticker AMCR. Those shares up more than 1%. They got a buy recommendation from Jefferies. This is a new recommendation. And the broker is seeing a compelling risk-reward ratio and good earnings momentum. So Amcor, it's a packaging solutions group. It recently combined with Berry Global. And so, analysts really liking that deal there. And so Jefferies analysts placing their price target at $12. Shares currently at $9.58 last I looked. So, yeah, good rating for Amcor there.
So we've been talking a lot about some of these healthcare companies. We were talking about Centene earlier, but you're looking at, is it Molina Healthcare?
Molina, yes, that's exactly right, Nora. So that's actually the second biggest decliner on the S&P 500. Again, this is all trading off of what we're seeing with Centene. But, yeah, Molina Health, ticker MOH, also seeing declines of nearly 20% at the moment. So one of the biggest kind of losers in that news flow. And, that momentum for those shares haven't been good in the past 5 days. They've been down 11%. They've fallen 12% in the past 30 trading days. Trading volume also above average in terms of the 20-day time frame. So that's 16% above average over the last 20 days. They're also trading 11 times their estimated earnings per share for the coming year, which is probably why investors kind of zeroing in on Molina as one of the kind of biggest sideswiped stocks today in light of the news from Centene.
All right. Excellent, Christine. Appreciate it as always, Christine Aquino. She covers all the markets for Bloomberg News. Stock Movers is the podcast. 5-minute reports on the big winners and losers in the stock market. That's updated throughout the day. So take a look at Stock Movers. That's the podcast. You can get it anywhere you get your podcast. It's all good stuff here. All right, let's get back to Tesla. It's been a name we've been talking about today. They reported some delivery numbers. Came in a little bit light of forecast. Stock's up a little bit today, and Dan Ives from Wedbush Securities suggested that might be because the whisper numbers out there were a little bit lower, so the company exceeded them. So we're there. But there's certainly been some negative sentiment around Tesla stock. It's down 25% year to date. There's some concerns about Elon Musk and his commitment to the company. But there's still a lot to like out there about Tesla if you look at the numbers. And that's what our next guest does. Matt Winkler, he's editor-in-chief emeritus of Bloomberg News. He founded Bloomberg News. To me, that's the point here. And he joins us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. Matt, thanks so much for joining us. You've got a column out today with your colleague Shin Pei saying, hey, if you look at the numbers here at Tesla, it's an extraordinary story still.
Yeah, and by the way, thank you for having me. And I would invoke our founder, Mike Bloomberg himself, who, when he was mayor of New York, would say often, in God we trust, everyone else bring data.
Yep.
And so the data compiled by Bloomberg shows that this EV startup we call Tesla, founded by engineers Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning in 2003, is still the world's largest automaker, 9th largest public company, and worth more than the gross domestic product of Saudi Arabia. And for all its might as a global sales leader, Toyota Motor Corp is about a quarter of Tesla's more than $1 trillion valuation as of today, after the very numbers that you reported. And by the way, the stock is up the most since June. Okay, so initially, the media take was negative, 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 and people with the most at stake, which is where the data is, say not so fast. And there's a reason for that. You know, what we did, my colleague Shin Pei and I, is we asked that very question. Okay, with all this negative news that is prevailing, that is the prevailing narrative, why is it that through thick and thin, every single month this year, Tesla is still worth more than Toyota? And Bloomberg's own alternative artificial intelligence function, DSX, tells us there are plenty of reasons. One is that if you just took out the vehicle itself, there's still $1 trillion market capitalization on the autonomous driving that is coming soon to everyone through Tesla. So there are all kinds of reasons why Tesla has the value that it has. But I would like to share with you something that I got from a Bloomberg user this morning, an email. He said, we don't need AI to understand why Tesla critics are losing. Critics are either motivated by hate, we've seen that, politics, or a misunderstanding of time. Tesla represents the most extraordinary array of products, some of which are destined to become core components of the future economy and life of humanity. That's from our Bloomberg user, John Billings, who's in Washington, D.C. So this is a big part of the story that everybody misses. And if you just look at quarterly sales reports, that's not going to give you the picture. But I would say, even in that context, the Model Y was the best-selling vehicle in the world in 2023, 2024, and poised to be certainly the best EV selling vehicle in 2025, and maybe again repeat. And the reason why the deliveries were slow in the first and the second quarter was because they were retooling, renovating, updating the Model Y. Sales are way up in Norway and Spain, by the way. So much for the demand problem.
How are you thinking about it in relation to peers? I mean, I know a lot of people have really been clamoring for Musk to turn his attention back to Tesla. And I mean, when we think about some of these numbers that we're parsing, as you mentioned, and your story, that everything about Tesla these days has really been ranging from bad to worse. So when you think about the future of the company in comparison to peers, you know, what are just some of the things that you expect in terms of performance moving forward?
Well, let's just look at the past 10 years, by the way. 2015, most of the analysts that provide forecasts were negative about Tesla, bearish, don't buy the stock. But what happened? Tesla's $97.7 billion of revenue last year is more than 30 times its sales a decade ago. Now, that outperforms even China's BYD, which has been the star of late in the media narrative. But if you look at something like Tesla's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, it's more than 300 times the company's profit a decade ago. Number two, BYD grew only 15 times. You know, if you look at Tesla's current market capitalization, it's 31 times its value a decade ago, which is just another way of saying that among the top 10 automakers that Tesla competes with, Tesla's revenue growth, its profit, and its market value are superior, according to data compiled by Bloomberg.
Always. Brand value, last question. One could argue the valuation has always had a big Elon Musk premium based into it. His brand arguably has been diminished over the last 6 months with his political actions in Doge. Is that a concern, or should it be a concern for investors? And you think, is there a long-term brand issue, do you think?
So I'm not qualified to answer that question. However, somebody who probably is Nicholas Colas, who's the co-founder of DataTrek. And he's been covering the auto industry since the 1980s, which is kind of when I sort of entered the picture. And he says there's something that is no algo spreadsheet can understand, which is why hero-led companies are often so valuable.
Yep, interesting. All right, Matt, great column. As always, Matt Winkler, Editor-in-Chief Emeritus, founder of Bloomberg News. I think he drives around one of these Tesla things. I kind of went there last time. I got my youngest a hybrid Honda, so I'm kind of getting there. But give me the
Hey,
gas
close.
engine. Give me the gas engine. Matt Williger, thank you so much. We appreciate that. All right, let's get back to Washington, D.C. A lot of things going on there. Tariffs. We got a tax and spending bill back at the House. Let's get some reporting from Tyler Kendall, Bloomberg White House correspondent. Tyler, thanks so much for joining us here. We just had a tweet from the president about some Vietnam tariffs. Was this expected? It seems like Vietnam is becoming a bigger and bigger trade partner.
Yeah, hey, Paul. No, this actually was unexpected considering that we had heard time and time again from this administration that we shouldn't expect any further trade frameworks until Congress was able to pass the one big, beautiful bill, right? We knew July 4th was the deadline that the White House has been eyeing for that, and July 9th would have been for eyeing for some of these trade deals to get done. Now, we should say that we are expecting these to be frameworks, not fully fleshed out deals, but according to President Trump's Truth Social post, Vietnam will pay 20% tariff on exports to the U.S. with a 40% levy on any transshipments. This is a really important key part as the administration tries to target those trading partners that they see could help them to counter China. President Trump has also said that Vietnam has agreed to drop all levies on U.S. imports. This would be the third framework deal, of course, after the UK and sort of the framework that we got with China, though we are waiting for more fuller fledged out details there, since the latest in that round of negotiations was that negotiators have agreed essentially to keep talking as we still wait for confirmation from the Treasury Secretary that China has started to release those key critical mineral export licenses that has really stalled out the process, at least on that front.
Tyler, as soon as we got this news, we saw shares of Nike, Lululemon, and a few of those other companies that do a lot of their work in Vietnam turning quickly negative. As we think about the trade war more broadly, is this a major development?
I mean, it is considered to be one in the fact that we really have not gotten much information out of this administration, and they really have been trying to show some sort of forward progress towards President Trump's goals when it does come to tariff deals. And it's important because this White House is looking for a confluence of economic factors to happen this summer when it goes hand in hand with passing his tax agenda. You even had him in a post on Truth Social earlier this morning, basically suggesting that tariff revenue would help to pay for some of the offsets in this tax bill when it does come to those pretty lofty tax cuts. Now, I do want to point out, particularly when it does come to transshipping, these are components from China and possibly other nations that are routed through Vietnam or subject to other minimal final assembly before being exported to the U.S. That's really where we're going to perhaps see some of these companies take a shift when it comes to their supply chains, because this really is a bid by the administration to crack down on what they see as a big competition from China.
While we have you, Tyler, we have to get the latest on what's happening with this big, beautiful bill here. Understand that reporting is it's back with the House. Any sense of timing here?
Yeah, so for our radio listeners, I'm actually here right in front of the Capitol where we just saw some House members go back on to the floor because we're waiting for them to debate and vote on what's known as the rule. Now, just to give you a little bit of background here, this wouldn't be voting on final passage, but they need to pass the rule before they can vote on final passage. So the fact that we have already seen this delay is spelling some trouble for House Speaker Mike Johnson. Now, I actually just had the chance to catch up with Congressman Chip Roy. He's a Republican from Texas. He came out here and gaggled with us reporters just a few short moments ago. He told us that at the moment, he's a no, and he thinks that they do have enough votes to block this rule from going forward. What that would mean, Paul and Nora, is that these Republicans would have more time to dig in their heels and demand some sort of compromises, either from the administration through pledges, for example, for a reconciliation package down the road, or executive orders, or they could force this to go back to the Senate. But it is hard to imagine that that would happen. That would be a very politically fraught move because it would jeopardize President Trump's July 4th timeline, and we know that he is starting to call those lawmakers up to the White House to hold discussions today.
So what are the odds of a smooth passing forward through this?
I wouldn't say it's a done deal, but it could really go either way here because we have to keep in mind that this bill was designed not to ping pong between the different chambers. If House Republicans want to make changes, they're going to have to call what's known as a conference committee. That gets the Senate back involved, and it turns into a much longer process. But there are two factions of the Republican Party right now that are really voicing concerns. One are those House Freedom Caucus members that are concerned about the deficit spending levels in this bill. They say that the Senate's plan has fallen short by about $500 billion in spending cuts that they had wanted to see. They are very important to watch, but we do think that perhaps they could be appeased through some sort of other deal or assurances with the White House.
Tyler, great reporting. Thank you so much. We appreciate always your reporting from the nation's capital. Tyler Kendall, Bloomberg White House reporter down there in D.C., front lines, front of the Capitol. We got representatives coming back from their district to come back and vote on this deal. We'll have continued reporting going forward. This is
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. We're being brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses, Oracle offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. This for new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitments. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. Let me start with Nike. That's climbing along with some of the other apparel and footwear companies after President Trump said he reached a trade deal with Vietnam. Right now, you have shares of Nike up close to 3%. Lululemon, they make a lot of their stuff in Vietnam, too. Those shares right now up about 0.7%. Tech mega caps leading gains with Tesla. Those shares right now 5% higher. They had a drop in sales, but that was better than most analysts feared. Apple gaining 2%. They had an analyst downgrade at that company. Ahead of the jobs report that we get tomorrow, non-farm payrolls, the data today that we got from ADP showed employment at U.S. companies fell for the first time in more than 2 years. I have to take a look at the UK markets, sinking sharply. Investors worried about the state of Britain's finances. There's also speculation swirling about the possible exit of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. That would be Rachel Reeves. The gilts there, the 10-year gilt yield is 14 basis points higher. That is at 459 right now. Overall, the S&P 500, 14 points higher, 6212 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average just turning positive, up 3 points. The NASDAQ 100, 136 points higher. That is up 0.6%. Restaurants take notice. This is from the Journal. I thought this was an interesting story. According to a recent study, people prefer wide-rimmed glasses to narrow-rimmed ones. Not only prepared to spend more on beverages and wider glasses, the more likely to reorder drinks that are served in wider glasses. Wide glasses also led people to pick more expensive beverages. So think like wine glasses versus a champagne flute.
Yep.
So.
All right, back from my bartending days, and I was a heck of a bartender. You got to fill the glass to the top with ice. I mean, I sent.
Thank you.
I mean, where are some of these bartenders trained, John? I mean, come on.
We got to send them back.
Yeah.
I skipped the glass, Nora.
Just go
straight for the bottle.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway,
hey, that works too.
Yeah, so anyway, if anybody's going to be serving me a drink tonight at Squan Tavern down in,
Listen up.
Keep that in mind.
Take care of your bartenders, everybody.
Take care of that, Mark.
Most definitely.
Mark, the Squan Tavern, he's my man here. All right, let's talk alternative assets here. John Tucker, thank you so much. Norma Linda, Paul Sweeney live in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live as well. Jeffrey Palma joins us, Senior Vice President and Head of Multi-Asset Solutions. I'm not sure what that is, but I'm going to say it has to do with some alternative investments, maybe some real investments like real estate. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us here. Cohen & Steers, I've known this asset manager on the street forever, but I've never done business with them because you don't really own media stocks, which was my game. You guys own real estate, REITs, stuff like that. Talk to us about how you guys look at the marketplace and where you see opportunity.
Yeah, so thanks for having me this morning. So we focus, as you mentioned, on real assets and alternative income strategies. And those real asset strategies in particular, real estate, infrastructure, commodities, natural resource equities. In short, things that are exposed to the real economy, that have real ties to the economy, inflation-sensitive assets. So that's certainly been a really important part of the world these days. And then that all kind of fits in also to that alternatives universe that we think offers diversification to your traditional stock and bond portfolio.
So I cover REITs for our equities team, so super happy to have you here. As I'm looking at REITs performance this year, I mean, we're seeing shares that didn't really do much. I'm looking at a gauge that's up about 0.4% so far this year. What are you seeing in terms of performance and opportunities within the REIT space? Any particular subsectors that you're keeping an eye on?
Yeah, so I mean, we should also kind of think about the year has already been full of a whole bunch of rotation. It was a pretty good first quarter for REITs. They've cooled off a little bit in the second quarter, and that sort of is the mirror image from the broader S&P. Broadly speaking, we think that REITs are pretty fairly valued, actually, attractive relative to broader equity markets. Within the REIT space, there's certain areas that we like, and then within the private real estate space, I would also add, there's areas like open air shopping centers that have become, to us, we think are finding a bottom, and in that private space is a little bit different than the listed space as well.
In private space, I always make the mistake of commercial real estate just thinking, oh, it's office, but I know it's now so much more. I've now learned that through people kind of pointing it out to me. In commercial real estate broadly defined, where do you guys see value in the private side?
Yeah. So Nora will tell you that office is only about 3 or 4% of the total listed index. Now, that's down, and our team has been underweight office for a long time, and so we've really benefited from that trade. So within that space, I mentioned in the private space that open air retail looks a little bit better. In listed markets, we've favored things like multifamily homes. Within healthcare, maybe a little bit nichier, but senior living areas. Certainly data centers have been a very important part. That's true not only in real estate, but also things tied to that in the infrastructure space as well.
So you mentioned open air shopping centers. Do you mind just explaining to our listeners what exactly that is? Because I know a lot of people were talking for a long time about the death of the mall. So speak to that.
And this is not quite the mall. It's like the renaissance of the mall, if you like. So think about, in some cases, outlet centers, or in some cases, open air outside where you have necessity-based shopping centers. So it might have a grocery anchor or a big box anchor, things that have durability to the internet shopping cycle, but then it's sort of built around an anchor store. Those are areas where it looks like prices have bottomed. There has not been new supply in the area for the reasons that you mentioned, because malls have been a really tough spot. So yields are pretty good. Earnings growth looks pretty good in that area, and that's why we find some interest in that space.
Where is the capital markets as it relates to real estate these days? If I want to go out and develop a multi-family unit or some kind of piece of commercial real estate, where am I going to get the money to do that? Is my local bank going to lend me that money for a real estate deal?
So obviously the last few years have been really challenging for real estate in general. Debt markets have really been tough. Actually, I think the good news here is that at the margin, the debt markets are starting to open up a little bit. It just means, losses are making their way through. People are kind of realizing some of that. So we are seeing some pickup in lending. There's going to be pockets where that's possible and where there's challenges. So you should think about this less as a national trend and much more as a local, and even in some cases a hyper-local sort of a trade to be able to do it. But the debt financing is coming back, but it's been coming back slowly.
Super quickly, I know you mentioned you're underweight office and have been for a while. Any other areas that you guys are actively avoiding?
Well, in certain areas, we've certainly seen an increase in supply sort of working its way through. And that's been, in some cases, apartments and some of those areas, because that's where the rent growth has been strongest. It's where there's been most resilience in the cycle. But as that supply comes through, it still takes some time to absorb. So that would probably be an area where we've been a little light.
Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us. Jeffrey Palmas, Senior Vice President, Head of Multi-Asset Solutions at Cohen & Steers, and a proud graduate of Rutgers University. I'm a huge fan of Rutgers, the state university of New Jersey. I've hired a ton of kids out of Rutgers over the year, and he joins us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. All right, let's switch gears. Let's get over to Wimbledon. They're playing tennis over there, but guess what? There is a business story to be had there, and we got it. Jamie Morris, Bloomberg News UK business editor. Jamie, talk to us about what's happening with the VIP tickets over there. I think there's a market over there, right? Oh, he's not ready. There you go. Fantastic. So anyway, but apparently have you been to Wimbledon, Nora?
I have not.
Tucker,
I need to go.
I know. I'm not even going to ask.
Not yet. I would like to go. One of the problems over there right now, as is the case with the rest of Europe, they're undergoing a heat wave.
Brutal.
And I think they had to cover up the center court just to keep it cool.
Yep. So, but
they have the clay courts. Does clay melt?
No, they got the grass courts over there.
Oh, the grass courts.
They're grass courts over there. Yeah. So, all right, we got Jamie now. Jamie, UK business editor for Bloomberg News in London. Jamie, talk to us about what's happening over there in Wimbledon with some of the tickets and some of these VIP seats.
Yeah, the demand is incredible. I mean, you've seen this sort of price increase across all sorts of sports and different events, but at Wimbledon they sell these debentures, so sort of VIP tickets in the main courts, and they're going for thousands of, I mean, like we're talking over £100,000, just so like $150,000 for like you guaranteed seats for 5 years. But before that even kicks in, you can even attend. These tickets are trading for something like double that. So these guys are investing and making a load of money. But even if you actually keep them and just sell those tickets on the day, you could make thousands more per day. So like it's a pretty good play for investors as well. It's really interesting.
I mean, this is an event that everyone always has their eyes on. And as we're looking at these prices, super expensive. Is this usually the type of pricing power that they've had in the past, or is this year a bit unique?
They've got a lot of pricing power, but it's really increased over the last 5-6 years, I'd say. People thought maybe after Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, retiring, Djokovic is still going, of course, that era of players, great players disappearing, that might mean that there's demand fading, but not at all actually. I think there's more mobility, people are traveling internationally more, especially the demand from the US fans is incredible. I mean, they'll really pay the big bucks to go to Wimbledon and say they've been there and attended the matches on centre court, and they're willing to fork out thousands of dollars per ticket. So the demand's been really strong, and the uptick in value has been incredible. We're seeing these sort of 5-year periods increasing something like 70% in value each time, and then those tickets are being traded on, another 70% on top of that. So it's pretty incredible.
Jamie, John Tucker here from Bloomberg News was reporting that the heat wave over there in Europe. Talk to us about London and Wimbledon, and how hot is it for you guys? Because you guys aren't really used to this stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty hot here right now. I mean, actually, today's a little bit cooler than it has been. We had a little bit of rain this morning for the first time in a while, but it's been really hot, and that's kind of perfect for Wimbledon. People want to go over there and spend the day in the sun. You get uninterrupted play. I mean, the two main courts have retractable roofs over them, which was actually these are the things that the debentures pay for, so the sort of investment in construction and expansion and so on. So they always get now sort of uninterrupted play, but it means that all the outside courts, there are like another 20 or 30 or so. It means that people that queue up for overnight as well. You have these queues around. It's a very British tradition of queuing. Happens in the courts, in the park opposite. So people camp overnight, and a lot of Americans do that as well because they just want a taste of the action. It's incredibly popular, even more so than it was when I was growing up. And people used to queue from 7 in the morning, but now it's like if you don't get there, in the early hours in the dark, you haven't got much of a chance.
Jamie, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Jamie Nemo, he's UK business editor for Bloomberg News, reporting from the London Bureau regarding Wimbledon. Here's something I thought interesting. Wimbledon is for the first time breaking its 147-year tradition of having line judges in characteristic suits determine if the ball is in or out of bounds. They have been replaced with robots and artificial intelligence that uses camera footage to track the ball and make calls. And I have to admit, particularly on television, that technology looks really cool, and it's super accurate.
I just think back to John McEnroe screaming at the line judges.
You cannot be serious.
Can't forget that.
But it works, and it's actually good for when you're in the stadium, because then they flash it up on the screen, and you see it when everybody else sees it, when the players see it as well, in or out. So
that's cool.
I was fortunate enough to go to Wimbledon once, so that's off the bucket list. It was a great experience. This is Bloomberg.
headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. The major stock averages rising right now. President Trump announced a trade deal with Vietnam. The S&P 500 rebounding from some of the earlier losses. Some of the individual shares on the move. Tesla up 4.3%. The car maker posting a less drastic decline in vehicle sales than the most pessimistic analysts had feared. The worst performing stock in the S&P 500, that belongs to Centene, the health insurer, shocked investors after it withdrew its profit outlook. They blame rising risk from the Affordable Care Act plans. Brian Nick at New Edge Wealth so far isn't too crazy about stocks or bonds.
What do you really hope to get from an upside here with 22 times earnings, 36, 37 times Schiller PE? It doesn't look like an appetizing time. And then you have to look at the other side of the ledger, the bond market. You really have to go into this with your eyes wide open with the debt situation coming up and the potential that the Fed cutting interest rates at the short end may not do much.
Right now, the S&P 500 is up 16 points. That's a rise of 0.3%. We're at 6214 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 38 points at 44,532. The Nasdaq 100, 120 points higher. That is up 0.5%. The two-year yield ahead of the non-farm payrolls report tomorrow. Right now, unchanged at 3.76. The canned fruit company, Del Monte Foods, they've been in business for well over 100 years. Filing for bankruptcy, Del Monte Foods, they executed a debt overhaul last year. That was kind of controversial. Also became the subject of a lawsuit. And hackers targeting airlines. The latest, Qantas Airways, they say a significant amount of customer data was stolen by a cyber attack targeting one of its contact centers. The criminals gained access to a third-party platform used by the call center. It held the service records of 6 million of their customers. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Nora and Paul.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Nora Melinda, Paul Sweeney, live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. We're also on your smart TV, Roku, all that kind of stuff. Just search Bloomberg Pursuits, and that's where you'll find us here. I tell you, one of the more competitive industries I see out there day in and day out is the wireless business. You got the big three, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and it's all on price. I mean, it's all kind of the same.